So, good morning, you guys. I want to say rest in peace to my friend Tommy Fury. And he's one of the few people in my entire life that I even consider like a best friend. And there are a lot of reasons why I want to say this. That, like, first of all, like, I used to be very much involved in the Connecticut film community like about 10 years ago, roughly around like 2014, 2015, 2016, and 2017. And when I've worked with Tommy and I've got to know him, he was actually one of the few people that showed me a bunch of respect, really. And that always really, really meant a lot. Like, I've always talked about, my issues with the 40-hour film project. Like, the first year I did it in New Haven in 2014, people were saying it's great that a black guy's doing the competition. Another person was saying, why don't you want to work with me? Is that blacks want to work with blacks? But nothing like that would ever come out of Tommy's mouth, really. And I also remember, again, another thing was that I didn't make a great film with the 40-hour film project in New Haven one year. So I remember, like, somebody reading off the nominations and saying whatever film Byron created, like a bunch of just like undermining stuff. And then, something that I would even call mental health discrimination, because I used to be really naive. I used to not look people in the eyes when I was younger because I was going through a lot. I was very introverted. So some people through my life assume that I'm autistic when I'm not. So it's almost like that type of thing you see where people just think, oh, well, you might be stupid, you might be autistic, catch how you may not catch how people are insulting you, and that's kind of what I dealt with, really. And I've also have worked with many different filmmakers, so I remember like doing a project. I was doing behind the scenes for somebody, and then Tommy was working on the project as well, really. And he and I were always really, really cool and stuff like that. And I remember like one thing he always said was that like one thing he learned in his life is be patient, be polite, be present, be respectful. And that really, really meant a lot to me because I remember another time I did the 40-hour film project, one of the city producers told me, screw you and fuck you is the philosophy filmmakers live by. And I've also have seen a lot of like and I also like have learned over time that filmmaking is a business of sociopaths. But when I look at Tommy, he was always that person, in my opinion, one of the few people that were like, hey, filmmaking is not just as my therapist used to say, which is bad advice. My therapist used to say, once you're successful, then that's when you can be an asshole, really. And Tommy had some success. He was really well respected, but he was not somebody that was above, respecting and disrespecting people. In my experience with him, he always had respect for people. He was always a very, very committed person, and that means a lot to me. And that's kind of what is very heartbreaking. The other thing about Tommy, and I will say this, that my life has gone down a very challenging path, really. Like when I stopped doing filmmaking in New Haven, like the last film that I did was like in 2017. I remember, like going through a lot of depression at that time and saying, you know what, I wish I was dead. So in order to feel that way, I just traveled a lot, really. I did a film in Cleveland. I did a film in Atlanta. And I traveled a lot, really. But one thing that always made me think about New Haven was Tommy, because I was like saying, I would always like to work with him. I would always like to improve my skills so that way I can bring the best out of him. Because I was one of those people, and people know this. I'm not the best filmmaker. And when you get better and better, when you get more experience, you can bring out the best, not in yourself, but in other people, really. But he was always one of those people that I kind of felt like, when people say everybody leaves New Haven, and people talk about the Connecticut film community and all the things that happen in our film community with, racism, backstabbing politics, mean people, two-faced people. Tommy was always one of those people that encouraged people to come to New Haven and embrace New Haven and other things like that. So, I really just, I'm just really, really, sad that he's gone, really. Like, honestly, too, if I could do anything, I know this may offend people, but if I could sell my soul to the devil, I would say, hey, I'd give him the rest of my lifespan, kill me now, just so Tommy can, like, if I was supposed to live another 50 years, kill me now so he can live that 50 years and do the best, really, because, he's had such an impact on people, because, and I really think that, he could have done a lot more. He could have achieved a lot more. in his life than I ever could, really. Like, so as I said, it's really unfortunate um, when good people die, really. And it's actually kind of scary because I always had weird thoughts about life and fate and death. And I believe, and I used to have this thought process that when you're born, you are given like a choice, really. You're given a choice of suffering psychologically or suffering physically. Because I've met a lot of people in my life who suffer one way, really, either psychologically, like I do, or physically, like Tommy did with his with his illness. And I'll talk about that in just a minute, really. So it's just part of like life's challenges. But I don't really believe that. Like life is like a lottery ticket. Like we're born into a situation, and we make the best of it, really. And one thing that I really respect about Tommy, and one of the biggest mistakes in my life, is that like when I was dealing with a lot of bullying and racism in the Connecticut film community, I had a mental breakdown, and I was kind of like I had this I had a couple of nightmares, and one of the nightmares, I heard like a voice in one of my dreams saying that I should be a sociopath, I should be mean like other people, really, or I should be as horrible as a sociopath to get myself ahead, really. Um, and then I remember just saying, I thought of like many people who took advantage of me, treating me like I'm stupid. And I remember like how I would go to work and I would be like, always kiss my boss's butt, talking about him about all the accomplishment, all the hard work that I'm doing, trying to be the best employee. And I would just treat other people very poorly, really, because I was trying to imitate how people treated me in the Connecticut film community. Like, respect other people, have a good presentation of yourself, but pick and choose who you're going to treat like shit, really. And I remember like how I hurt a bunch of people, and I've been working really hard to atone for my sins. There's actually a point where I thought about even taking my own life to atone for all the people that I've hurt in that situation, really. But it was bad because one thing that could have saved my life is I could have said, hey, you know what? I've met people who are very two-faced. They'll treat me like shit. Um, they'll instigate me. They'll hurt me. And that's just how filmmakers are, really. And that's why I believe that I went down that path. But I'm responsible for going down that path. When you have a dark philosophy and you believe in that dark philosophy, you end up walking into that darkness, and that's your own fault. But one thing that could have saved me is if I said, hey, that's bullshit. Think about Tommy. Think about Connor in Rhode Island. Think about Jimmy Caputo in Rhode Island. Think about, a few other people in the Connecticut film community, like J.V. Harvey, really, who's a good guy. Or think about, my friend Renata, who's another really good person. Think about, like, the good people. It's not just, backstabby, Sopranos type of two-faced people that are successful in this community. So honestly, too, I would have saved myself a lot of pain if I said, hey, you know what, that's bullshit. There are so many good people in this film community, not just, people who've given me a bad experience, not just people who will be like, oh, well, maybe Byron's naive, or, oh, well, maybe Byron talks too much, or maybe, Byron is black when I'm actually mixed raced, or, oh, well, Byron doesn't look people in the eye, well, it's treat me like he's stupid, really. And then I learn, oh, well, since people treat me that way, I should just become another, like, sociopath and embrace my darkness, really. And I learned when you look at people like Tommy, he's a reminder that that is a way to get to the top, being a horrible person, but that's not everybody's path. And Tommy's path was not to be a horrible person, not to just destroy people or make people give up or make people doubt themselves, like a lot of people did to me. So when I think of Tommy, I think of one of the good guys that actually, that really actually gave a fuck about treating people with respect, really. Um, and it was also really, really sad what happened to me a few years ago, which was that I started traveling around the U.S. I was really, really close to visiting all 50 states, and one of the last states that I had to visit was Alaska. And I remember going to Adak Island, which is roughly 4,567 miles away. I did a chat GPT, and it was really, really sad because I kind of told myself when I was up there that I would rather be here 4,000, like roughly 4,600 miles away from Connecticut, because I felt like my film community was not to be trusted, as the old expression goes, and it's the name of a film group in New Haven. Everybody lives in New Haven, really. I felt like I had to go that far, 4,600 fucking miles to feel like I can be the filmmaker that I want to be instead of in my own film community. And that is very, very fucking sad. But I remember, like, looking at some pictures on Facebook. Some people had updates about working with professional wrestlers like The Miz and whatever. And I just said to myself, I remember seeing Tommy in one of those pictures. And I was like, damn, he's one of the reasons why I should just give New Haven another shot, really. And then it was crazy because the next day, I went to Point Barrow, the most northern point where William Rogers passed away. And I even said too, you know what? I don't have that much time here in Point Barrow, but imagine if I brought my drone. Imagine if I imitated Leonardo DiCaprio in The Revenant, and I was staying here long term, really, or for a couple of weeks trying to get all the good footage, and saying to myself once again, isn't it very, very sad that I'm like almost 4,600 miles away from, maybe like 5,000 miles away from New Haven, Connecticut, and I'd rather be working in, like up by the Arctic Ocean where I could possibly be killed by polar bears, because I would rather be backstabbed by a polar bear than backstabbed by a Connecticut filmmaker. How sad is that? And when I think about Tommy, one of the reasons why, I've always had a hope to come back to Connecticut, really. So it's definitely very, very fucking important to understand we have a good impact. We all have the ability to kill people and save people by our actions and how we treat them. In my lifetime, I've helped a lot of people. I've destroyed some people. I've saved a lot of people. I work like all that I can in the hospital, 64 to 80-hour weeks to atone for all my sins. Nobody's going to change my mind. I don't believe in a Jesus Christ figure saying, okay, you know what, I died for your sins, so therefore you're forgiven, you live a life without atonement. No, I believe in lifelong atonement because that teaches you to be accountable for your behavior. And I also believe that through my journey of working over 12,000 hours at my hospital job in less than 4 years, it's taught me that if I'm on the righteous path, I can help people, I can do great things, really. But there are people like Tommy who suffered from cancer, really. That really fucks you over financially, that fucks you over physically, that fucks over your relationship, that really fucks over your future. That really fucks over your look at the future. It really fucks you over. And he has the ability to be positive and respectful to people through all that. Because honestly, he could have been like Walter White and be like, you know what, fuck, I'm going to die soon. I don't care who I hurt. I don't care who I manipulate. I'm just going to make it about me. And I'm just going to knock down anybody that I can. I'm going to manipulate anybody I can. I'm going to make everybody feel sorry for me. I'm going to go out like a big victim just to put all the cameras on me, really. And Tommy was not like that because he knew better and he knew that was wrong, really. But there are a lot of people who would totally go down that Walter White, I'm sick, it's all about me type of route. And it's actually kind of ironic, really, because I work at the hospital that he died at. The night that he worked, I was actually seeing Sunset Boulevard, which was a film about how people have negative experience in the film industry and they allow that toxicity to change them and they only care about their ego and their narcissism. How it's a precautionary tale of that. But Tommy's life is also a precautionary tale of that because he shows you how much, you get out of life by not being like Norma Desmond in Sunset Boulevard, or how, you don't act like Light Yagami in Death Note, where he was all about mental mind games to get himself ahead, really. Or you don't act like, Tony Soprano, same thing, mental mind games, backstabbing people to get ahead, really, So very, very ironic, really. And also, too, and I'll say this, that he was at the hospital. He texted me on Instagram a few weeks ago to come see him. But I intentionally chose not to see him. And one of the reasons why I didn't do that was because I'm not a fan of sentimental moments. I'm not a fan of knowing someone's gonna die and then having a big cry about it. Like I've told people met before, and I'll say it again, that I got in touch with my biological father. I don't want to see him, and it's not because I hate the man. It's because I don't want to have that, that Spielberg ending of like, hugging my dad, kissing him on the cheek, tears down the eyes. And I didn't even want that with Tommy, really. I didn't want to have that type of, he's gonna die, give him a hug, maybe a kiss on the cheek, and be like, you know what, man, this hurts, because I'm not about that sentimental crap, really. My life is dark. I love that my life is dark because in my life, I believe darkness is reality. Life is dark, but it's what you do with the darkness. As the old saying in the Japanese anime goes, in the end, the world lies in darkness, but that is why we seek the light, really. And when I think about that quote, I think about how, like I said, darkness is truth because life gets darker as you get older. A lot of people you love die, a lot of people you care about die, and that's how you really deal with it. And we end up dying, and sometimes, we die in a hospital, or we know that our body's getting sicker as we get older. We know that, we're going to live another decade and that's it. Or sometimes we know we're going to live, another 10 days or 10 hours. We all have that intuition, really. And Tommy had that. I'm very sure he had that, but he was but as I said, he did not become the Walter White of the Connecticut film community and be like, I have cancer, I'm gonna play Byron like a fool. I'm gonna play every filmmaker like a fool and get myself ahead and put all the attention on him, really. But there's a lot of people who would do that. So it's really fucking sad. It really, really hurts me that he's dead, really. And definitely, I really want to say that, remember, the lesson of Tommy Fury is a couple of things. Really, what you do, how you treat people is very powerful. Because unfortunately, my experience with the Connecticut Film Facility, I met more hurtful people than good people. But there are a lot of good people out there. I'll not turn that into a stereotype. The other thing I learned is that Hulk Hogan died last week. So there's a lot of people cheering for Hulk Hogan being dead. There's a lot of people saying Hulk Hogan's burning in hell. And then there's a lot of people sad that Hulk Hogan's gone and think that he's in heaven, really. He's a 50-50 figure. But with Tommy Fury, he's done a lot of good things. There's a lot of people who hold him in a high regard. And it's because he's chosen, through whatever challenges he's had in his life, to be good to other people. He's not going to go down like Hulk Hogan where it's 50-50, or he's not going to go down like somebody like Chris Benoit who some people will talk greatly about or talk about the good side, but a majority of people will pay attention to the bad side. He will go down as a filmmaker, as an actor who showed a lot of respect to people. It's very unfortunate that I was never a skilled enough filmmaker to bring the best out of him. I honestly think that if Tommy Fury worked with a person like Stanley Kubrick, he would be going down a really great path, really. He always had that potential. He can play any villain character good. If you give him any advice on how to improve, really, he was very analytical. He would have done a lot of great things, really. Another sad part about being a filmmaker is that, filmmaking is almost like having millions upon millions of seeds. Some seeds get selected and they grow into these beautiful flowers. All the other seeds can do the exact same thing, but it's a selected few that's allowed to shine their brightest because, not everybody's born in the Hollywood system. It's very political and whatever, really. So, there's a lot I can learn from Tommy. I think that one big thing I've learned is that whenever you're going through a hard time, remember the good people. If you ever believe that it's just bad and hurtful people to get ahead, you think of the Tommy Furies of the world. You think of people who actually give a shit about going really far and making the difference. For example, I work at a hospital. I've really, really have changed from my prior job. I work really hard. I'm very humble. People appreciate my work, and I say things like, it's the team. It's not about me. I'm working hard because I used to slack off where we used to be. I always am humble. I always really try to be that Tommy Fury type of person where I'm always about being humble, being respectful, having things that really piss me off, and still do my best really. And as somebody who has had pain through my body when I work, like I've had pain in my eyeballs, I've had pain in my chest. I know like I've pain in my leg. I've had sensations like my muscles moving by themselves really because I used to work 80 hours a week really. Sometimes I have blurry vision or whatever, and I keep on going really. I may work myself to death, but that's what I want for myself. But you know, and I have a very frustrating life. Like I have, I have a very frustrating life. I have a bunch of traumatic experiences. I have a home life that's challenging. I have a family life that's challenging. I'm so stressed out because I'm so busy. I'm very hurt from my experiences with the 48-hour film project. I'm hurt from a lot of things, really, but I've almost behaved like Tommy Fury at my job where I don't allow my personal shit to bring out the worst in me. I've done that many, many times, really. So, honestly, as I said, when I was going through hard times, if I said, you know what, I'm going to behave like Tommy Fury because that motherfucker knows how to go through hard times, knows how to go through physical challenges, knows how to deal with how expensive it is for all the cancer treatments. A person who knows that sometimes when you do acting, it's a lot of like working for free for a long time before you get your big break. It's a lot of, and as he said, like giving up relationships because you got to be married to your craft, even though you may work hard every single day and you may only be you may not be you may never be recognized to the level that you think you are. Because as I said, like as I said, there's many people who, in filmmaking, like I said, it's millions of seeds, but a few seeds are selected that become beautiful plants. So, yeah, I've definitely, without ever using him as an influence, but now I'll use him as influence, like following the same path that he did of going through challenges and being a good person, that's how I remember Tommy Fury. And as I said, if I had the ability to sell my soul to the devil and be like, hey, you know what? I'm gonna live another 50 years. Give that to Tommy Fury, and send me down there. I wish I could have that ability. So because what, like I said, he's a better man than I am. He has had a better impact on this world than I am. There's a lot of people who love and care about him. And ultimately he's a good person. Well, I'm trying to be a good person. There's a great line in the Ballad of Gunga Din. Though I belt you, no, so I belt you, though I flayed you. By the living God that made you, you are a better man than I am. So that almost means like you've hurt somebody a lot, but you know that the other person's better by tolerating you. But I've never hurt Tommy in any way, but I've had both a really good impact and a bad impact on humanity. Really, where he's had kind of more of a consistent good impact. He is a good person. He chooses to be a good person. I'm trying to be a good person. There's a difference between trying and being. So, so like as I said, definitely, another thing I wish too is that it would be really awesome if there was a alternate storyline or there was an alternate timeline or there was a reincarnation where we were brothers. If he was actually my brother or one of my brothers, I'd be the happiest person in the world. But it's very, very fucking painful. It's very, very fucking painful. But we gotta just be like him, move forward, do the right thing. And even though there's a lot of sadness and darkness in the world, and like I said, we live in a very dark world. It gets darker as you go on because you lose a lot of things. You lose family, you lose your health, you lose your mortality, you lose everything really. So as we age, we gotta also through our lives that we go through the dark times, we gotta just remember the good people and remember how they have done well, like Tommy. And as he said, just be patient, work hard, do the right thing, show up, respect people, and you'll definitely go far, but if not, you'll at least be remembered for being a good person. When there's a lot of people who just believe the opposite, you know. So, in an industry of sociopaths, in an industry of very hurtful people, he was the complete opposite of that, really. And when James Baldwin talks about the film industry and says the devil finds work in Hollywood, the devil finds work, Tommy Fury is like a guardian angel.